Okay, so I have the recorder on. I'm also going to share my screen. Not my email, you don't need that. All right. So, welcome. My name is Carly Wharton. For those of you who are new, I'm so glad you're here. And those of you who are returning, so glad to see you again. This session is on the outer planets of astrology. So, if that's where you intended to be, you are absolutely in the right place. We will go through this first part pretty quickly. I'm guessing if you're here, you already have some basis of astrology knowledge to build on. If you do have questions, though, I'm going to be stopping throughout, so feel free to either drop something in the chat and I can answer from there, or pop in when I stop for questions. So to get us started and get us all grounded on the same page, we are on the Earth, and you see all of the other planets that are there around the Earth in the solar system. A while back, I did a session on the personal planets and the social planets, so the ones in the red boxes. If you're interested in that session, it is recorded and available on my YouTube channel. I'll put a link to that in the comments back on the event itself, just so I don't have to like go grab it now. And if you're watching this on YouTube, there is a link to that video in the description box as well. Today, we are covering those outermost planets, also known as generational planets. And these are the slowest movers through our solar system. That's why they're called generational, because typically you and people several years born around you will share those same placements. So like you think about the kids that you went to school with in your class, pretty much all of them probably shared your Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto placement. So like your whole generation has that same Pluto and Scorpio, Neptune and Pisces, whatever it is. Whereas the two sets in the red boxes, those are a little more likely that like you and your peers are going to be wired differently. That's why the fastest movers are called personal planets. These things change sign every month or two. So somebody born even a couple months different from you would have completely different placements of those planets. These middle ones move a little slower than the generational planets, or sorry, a little faster than the generational planets. Jupiter goes through about one sign a year, and Saturn takes about 2.5 years to go through a sign. So that tells us, you know, if you're if you're born right in the middle of Saturn moving through Sagittarius, then the people born about a year before and about a year after, all of those share that same placement as well. So there's some possibility to share those too. And the generational planets, they are very interesting. And these were some of the last ones that I dug into as I started digesting all of the little things that there are to study with astrology, because they're characteristics of the generation I came forth in and not necessarily personalized to me. So I think it definitely makes sense to start, if you're brand new to your natal chart, with your personal planets, and then kind of branch out to the social planets and eventually the generational. That's at least what makes logical sense to me. Welcome everyone who's joined in these last couple minutes. So good to see you. We're still in the intro. We're covering generational planets and Chiron. So this is a diagram trying to explain where Chiron is in our solar system. So Chiron itself is part asteroid and part comet. So it's not a planet per se, like the other things that we're going to cover today. When Chiron was discovered, it was the first of its kind, that body that's part asteroid, part comet. Since then, we've found several others in the solar system. But Chiron was the first, and it is unlike anything else that existed that we knew of at that time. So the story of Chiron is very fun and kind of fits in that range. Basically, where Chiron is, if you look, in the middle is Jupiter, out here is Saturn and here's Uranus. So the way that they describe Chiron's location is it orbits in between Saturn and Uranus. And we're going to get more into the symbolism of all of that. So when you're looking at your chart specifically, there's a lot of different pieces to overlay so that you can understand your unique energy. So the planet, like what we're going to cover today, is definitely maybe even a first piece to try to understand as you move into interpreting your unique placements. But, you know, the house that the planet is in will add its own flavor. The sign that the planet is in will add its own flavor. And the aspects that the planet makes to other pieces of your natal chart, all of those things are going to possibly make your energy manifest a little bit differently than just the planet archetype by itself. A perfect example is Mars in Pisces. So Mars is a very masculine, go-getter type energy. Pisces is a very feminine, passive, submissive, escapist type energy. So you think about, like, how does this direct Mars operate in indirect Pisces? Well, it makes its own unique expression. So definitely tying in the house sign and aspects is a must when you're looking at your own chart. But since this is a group session, we're going to just look at the planet archetypes. I don't think my slides are going to take close to the whole time. So we'll have plenty of time at the end for questions. And if you want to bring up, you know, your unique placement or your unique aspects, I will do my absolute best to either answer or at least point you in the right direction of how to learn more about that. So any questions so far before I dive into Uranus, where we're going to start?
Do we need to worry about house system and all that at this point, or?
I don't think so. I think that would come into play more when you're looking at your own chart, and whichever house system you like, I would, you know, say, okay, look at the planet and what house it landed in. Right now, where we're just going to look at the planet archetypes, I believe those are very consistent, even between Western and Vedic astrology. Maybe a little bit more detailed and different tangents on either side, but I think overall the planet archetype should translate no matter what kind of chart you're looking at.
Yeah, thank you.
That's a good question. Anything else before we proceed? Seems okay. Okay. So like I said, I was very late getting into the generational planets, and I was so, I mean, when I finally did, I was so excited to be there and, you know, wished I had explored them sooner. Each of these, while they are generational, so you're sharing them with your peers, I've kind of positioned them each as a path in your life. So like every single piece of our natal chart is representing a different side of who we are and a different piece of what we came here to do. And Uranus is the path to individuality. So the little thing that I put on there, when someone tells me to do something I was already planning on doing, well, now I'm not doing it. So that to me sums up the idea, the vibe of Uranus, is that it's almost rebelling just for the sake of rebelling, but we're going to get into all of that in much more detail. The path to individuality. So when we think about Uranus, we're talking about self versus society, and your true individual, authentic core self, like who your soul came here to be, versus all of the training and conditioning that you've received since getting here. So basically, from the time we're born, we're conditioned by our parents, by our communities, schools, churches, grandparents, friends. The training and conditioning that we receive, it continues our entire life, or at least attempts to train and condition us. And underneath all the conditioning is our real self. So the first step to working with your Uranus energy is to realize that there are actually two different layers to who you are and the way you experience yourself. One of those layers, and probably the one maybe you're more familiar with depending on how much inner work you've done, is the training and conditioning piece, like who I'm supposed to be. Like, I'm female in today's day and age, so I should get married and have some babies. Like that kind of understanding of like who you should be versus your real self that exists as a function of like you internally deciding how to express your individuality. Do you want to get married? Do you want to have babies? No, I don't. So I'm not going to, even though society, culture, any of those things might feel like they're putting that pressure on me. That pressure, that conditioning is an illusion that we can drop and follow our authentic selves at any time. So Uranus is helping us to seek a deeper truth of who we really are. That is why it is the path to individuality. So just some very basic kind of fun facts about Uranus. It's a generational planet. It happens to be the ruling planet of Aquarius, and Aquarius is also the ruler of the 11th house. Uranus spends about 7 years per sign, and think of that as like that's just enough time to really disrupt the status quo in whatever area of your life, whatever area of the chart it happens to be transiting for you. Those transits, like per house, last about 7 years. And there's a lot of work and evolution that can happen on ourselves in 7 years. So when you track Uranus transiting around your chart, you're looking at the cycles of personal evolution that your soul is undertaking. It goes retrograde about once per year, 5 months at a time. So that means that basically a little less than half of us have Uranus retrograde in our chart. And Uranus retrograde is a time where we get especially serious about evaluating the systems and structures that we are, like the rules that we're playing by, and we evaluate, is this really me or is this my conditioning? That Uranus retrograde 5 months is a time where that bubbles to the surface. So if you're born with Uranus retrograde, that's just kind of a constant state of being where you're here to reevaluate what you're doing and whose rules you're actually living by. The Uranus return happens every 84 years, so some people live to see that. Not many people live for two, if anyone. And most of us, though, experience our Uranus opposition, which happens around our early 40s, age 42, thereabouts. And that one is an actual turning point, usually in our early 40s. And you think about like the midlife crisis, it begins in our early 40s with our Uranus opposition, and it ends in our late 40s with our Chiron return, which we're going to get into at the end here. So that Uranus opposition that happens in our early 40s, that means that Uranus has moved halfway around the wheel from where you were born. It hasn't moved the other half yet. But during that time of that opposition, the pressure is on to release anything that is standing in the way of you being your true self. So a lot of people get divorced at that time. A lot of people change jobs or careers because they realize that, you know, maybe I chose my job to satisfy my father, but that was 20 years ago and he's gone. And what am I really doing this for? Those are the kinds of things that drastic changes can happen really quickly when we go through that Uranus opposition, even though it lasts a couple years in terms of how long that takes to play out. So Uranus is said to be the higher octave of Mercury. So Mercury being the fastest moving planet, very associated with our intellect and our logic. And so Uranus, like Mercury, is a lot about observing the world around you. But Uranus has an intuitive knowing that fills in the gaps that apparently is like just that much of a higher frequency of Mercury's ability to observe and be able to gather details and information. Uranus's mission, if it had to like boil it down, is disrupting and transforming the status quo. And Uranus is allowed to do that because if you skip down a few, I should have put this one next, but Uranus is very altruistic. It has humanitarian motivations. So Uranus represents our collective, and on a soul level, when we think about who we really are as individuals, our souls are all connected. I mean, our collective consciousness is really just one, and one with source or the universe, non-physical, whatever you want to call it. And so when we sink down to our most individual self, really there's a caring for not only ourselves, but for everyone. And so when you think about disrupting or transforming the status quo, depending on how much you like change, that can sound really scary, but always, always the underlying motivation is to make the world a better place for the collective. So there are lots of things that can change and systems that can be torn down to the ground and like, let's just start from a clean slate. And if that happens, like in the Uranus return, for example, if you do find your marriage falling apart or your career is not satisfying or whatever, and you feel a change on the horizon, those changes are always improving the status quo. It's not just change for change's sake, it's always going to be an upgrade where average consciousness is concerned. So there's a lot of like almost Robin Hood mindset, like taking from the people who are abusing the system and reaping those rewards and rebalancing so that everyone has a better quality of life. Everyone has a more fair shot at living a happy life here on this planet. Because it represents our rebellion, the first start or the first step to rebellion is to be conditioned, is to have something to rebel against. So when you look at your Uranus placement, it's also where you're likely to be conditioned, like where that rebellion is going to play itself out. So for example, mine is Uranus in Sagittarius in the 9th house. And Sagittarius, the 9th house, is like worldwide travel and expansive thinking and like forming your own version of the truth, whatever that looks like for you. And when you have Uranus in those places, they're like, probably you didn't start venturing out until way later in life. You probably started your journey very sheltered, very like closed in to a certain little world. And it was very scary to step out and challenge this little world and create a bigger one. But that is the journey of Uranus. That's the breaking free of where you started and moving towards a place that better represents your authentic self. Uranus goes beyond what is known. So it's fearless in the face of, well, we've never done that before. Uranus doesn't care. Uranus wants individual expression. And the whole point of the individual is that that's where we mutate as a species, like the mutations that make us better and better and better and better at survival and more efficient and whatever, those mutations, they happen inside an individual, and from the individual, they get passed out into the collective. So to step into the unknown, that's where improvement lives. So Uranus is fearless. Like it challenges any limitations that we're holding, any fears that are holding ourselves back. It's definitely, it can be a scary one as it moves through different places in your chart. Its goal is to shatter the system. So again, here, it's a way to kind of like release the fear around the concept of change is that the system wouldn't be shattered if it was working. And if it's not working, it will be shattered. So like we can look around at things that are being disrupted and things that aren't working and that are falling apart and whatever. And we can trust that, you know, Uranus's energy wouldn't be dismantling those things if they were serving their purpose in the best possible way that they could. So again, all of that changes for the better. It really does represent our personal freedom and ways that our personal freedom may be challenged. And then in general is just a nonconformist. So going back to the little penguin, like the fact that you're telling me I have to means it's like technically no longer an expression of my individual self. And therefore Uranus disagrees with it instantly because Uranus wants the most unique version of who you are to come forward and be seen. So each of these planets, I'm going to wrap up with healing around this energy, because every single one of them is representing a transformation, a different facet of who we came here to be, and what that healing is going to look like. Because when you work within each energy, they're all going to feel a little bit different. So Uranus, the grounds for that healing will be you acting out your own personal rebellion. So whatever that looks like for you, and again, you're going to have to look at the house and the sign and the aspects that Uranus is making. But that's scary, especially if you were born in the 40 years, which is like 1950 to 1990, thereabouts, where Uranus was opposite Chiron, where our individuality is opposing our deepest wound, where it no longer feels safe or good to think about expressing your individual self. So really shining that individuality out loud, it can be varying degrees of challenging depending on what else is going on in your chart. But that's the task, is to shine your individuality out loud, which means you will get unstuck. The things that are keeping you stuck, they will have to be eliminated in order for you to move forward and shine your individuality out loud. Doing that, expressing your authentic self, it naturally challenges the limitations that you're placing on yourself, and it lights up the conditioning that you're living by that's contradicting your authentic self. Uranus healing happens like a lightning bolt. So whenever you think about Uranus energy, it can be changes that happen in a blink of an eye, and that they change your whole life in the blink of an eye. Harsh liberations. So going back to Uranus doesn't dismantle things that are working. Uranus is only dismantling the things that aren't working. So if you're clinging, which read what I mean when I say clinging unnecessarily to something that's not working for you, sometimes the liberation from that thing can be harsh and painful and leave you feeling like you've really lost something and you're the victim of something awful. For example, your spouse cheats on you and you find out about it, and that leads to the end of the marriage. I'm thinking of a story of some people that I know where she was putting up with way more than she ever should have been, letting all these things slide and not calling her spouse out on it. And eventually he cheated and lied about it for a long time. And eventually she caught him with proof. And that is how their marriage eventually ended. She could have walked away years before that ever happened, and she wouldn't have gone through any of that. But she was living out her obligation. She had made a promise. They had kids together. She had a whole list of reasons why she couldn't leave this relationship that's not working. And in the end, the relationship fell apart anyway because it wasn't working. So it's like if you liberate yourself when in the early subtle signs that something's not working for you, you liberate yourself and walk away from that and towards something that is more authentically suited for who you are. There is no harsh liberation. But if you have experienced a harsh liberation, that's signs that we're clinging to things that aren't meant for us. To heal this energy means breaking free of expectations, which that's a deep one, because that can be the expectations of our parents. It can be the expectations of society or our community, or even ourselves, like that's probably the hardest one, because we can hold our expectations of ourselves really close to our core and sometimes even in our subconscious. And those expectations or those conditionings that we're living by, when they contradict our authentic self, we have to break free of those expectations. So there's a lot of shadow work that goes into living your most authentic self. Self-empowerment for humanity's sake. So that's like I want freedom for myself first and foremost, no doubt about it. I want to experience radical personal freedom. I think that also goes back to my Uranus and Sagittarius, but I don't just want it for me. I want it because I want to be an example that we can all live like this. this is a place that every single human being can get to because I walked here, and I can, I can point back to the path of, I didn't start here, but I worked my way over here. We're each an example. And when you think about living your most authentic self, you're not only benefiting for you, you're also shining a light of an example out into the world for anybody else who might be in that vicinity trying to work towards something similar. Depending on how thick your conditioning is, it can look like a complete reinvention of who you are. Like people saying, I don't recognize you anymore. I don't, like, your energy feels so different. What are you doing? What's going on? And the answer is, this is me. I wasn't being myself before. I was living according to who I thought I should be. And now this is the real me. So that transformation can look very drastic, especially from the outside, people who don't understand what you're doing, trying to get more in alignment with your authentic self. Again, in order to heal that Uranus, because it's so tuned in to the collective consciousness, in order to really get to that vibration, you have to remove the illusion that any of us are separate from each other. Like my soul is, sure, it belongs to my being, but at the same time, my soul is connected to your soul and every other soul, and all of us are connected through the universal energy. It's all together. So any benefit that I do for myself, any kindness that I show to myself, or care that I take of myself, or freedom that I allow for myself, any good that you do for you benefits collective consciousness. So when you realize that, like, your being, your life is sending ripple effects through the universe, whether you are living a aligned, happy, positive, joyful life, or you beat up on yourself and you hold yourself back and you're afraid to go for your dreams or whatever, no matter what you're doing, you're sending ripple effects through the universe, and it's affecting everyone. So Uranus healing is about recognizing, are you contributing something nice to the collective, or are you polluting? And I polluted for a long time before I knew better. And now this is one of those ways where it helps me to face my fears that hold me back from being my authentic self, by knowing that me doing it is going to show somebody else that they can do it. Just like I've watched teachers ahead of me who, they follow their authentic self. They use their voice to talk about what they're passionate about, and watching them do it has given me the courage. So following your authenticity, it's like paying it forward to the people who will come behind you in your footsteps. So that's all I have on Uranus. Are there any questions there before we move into the next planet? And we'll save specific placements for the end so we can see how much time we have to play with.
I'm wondering, for the older people who are really eccentric, is that just their personal traits, or is that like a Uranus transit?
I think, I've heard my girlfriend mostly, who's 48, or almost 48, she says, like, she just naturally, it's easier to be herself as she's gotten older. But I do think Uranus making its way through your houses, and eventually like your Uranus opposition, those are like cleansing to the conditioning. Like every time Uranus completes moving through one of your houses, it's like it's taken off of a layer of the film that's standing in the way of you being who you are. So by the time Uranus has transited half your chart, you have a lot easier time pursuing your authentic self. Probably, I'm 33, so I don't know. I'm hoping that it just gets easier and easier, but I do think that that has something to do with it. And then there's the people who, like, maybe they're Aquarius risings where Uranus would rule their chart, or their Uranus is conjunct the sun, or like some other prominent placement of Uranus in their chart, that maybe they just are like Teflon for conditioning. Because some people are like that, where very early on, they are pursuing who they are as an individual. They're outside the collective and they don't care. So some people are just born like that. Some people, I got to think a lot of us that are in that 1950 to 1990 window where we have Uranus opposite Chiron, I got to think like you pretty much have to get pretty far along before you're going to have the courage to really step outside the lines and demonstrate something different, something new that society's never seen before. Because you think about like, I mean, the mob is scary. The mob mentality is scary. Where like back in the day, they burned witches at the stake. I mean, the mob has done many scary things. And to be different in this world is an act of courage all by itself. So whether you're being different inside your home, in the privacy of your own home, or you're stepping out into the world and demonstrating your difference, I think there's an evolution that happens step by step by step as Uranus makes its way through each of your houses. Like right now, Uranus is in Taurus, and it's still going to be there for another, I don't even know, 3, 4, 5 years. So wherever that is in your birth chart, like for me, it's transiting my first house, and I can feel it these last couple years, like taking the film off of like who I thought I should be and me leaning more towards like an individual authentic expression of who I am. And that's not even to the Uranus opposition yet. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you.
Sure. Any other questions before I think Neptune's next?
I guess I have one.
Yeah.
So in my birth chart, I have Uranus conjunct Pluto, which directly opposes my Chiron and my moon and Saturn, all three. How does that interaction like with Pluto? Because Pluto also blows things up. So how do you think that interaction will work together?
Let's start there when we get to the end and we start talking about specific placements, because I'm going to go through Pluto. So we'll lay a really good foundation for that. And then, yes, let's start there when we get to placements, and we'll talk about that conjunction, because in short, that's a very powerful transformation is how I would interpret it. Yeah. And the act of rebellion is probably going to be that much scarier. The process is, the conditioning is probably extra thick, I would think. Like the rebellion, the strength of the rebellion kind of matches the layer of conditioning that you're having to sort your way through. So yeah, we'll get more into that because I don't remember that from your chart. And I know I've looked at it so many times. It's these generational planets, they're coming online for me, and it's fun to get to share them. Okay. Neptune, the path to spirituality. So the spiritual journey is individual, highly personal. It can be organized or regulated. It can't be organized or regulated. It isn't true that everyone should follow one path. Listen to your own truth. So already you can see how working with your Uranus energy and tuning into your individuality is going to help you when you get into Neptune's realm and you're leaning into your spirit. Kind of both are requiring us to turn inward and really get familiar with who our soul is and came here to be. Neptune theory, it's how you need to spiritualize your life. So when we look at your sign, house, and aspects, that paints a picture of like what your spiritual path would look like. And not everybody's is the same. I have some examples, and they can be vastly different, and you will all wind up in spirit. So judging our spiritual path according to other people just like doesn't fly in the Neptunian realm. Based on where our soul is in its larger evolution, there is something we need to claim to ascend our soul. So somewhat like Uranus, where we first start by receiving our layer of conditioning, Neptune also requires us to like take a step forward in some way, and in doing that step forward, it will be a spiritual access point. So again, we have to look into the exact chart to see what exactly is that? And probably it's something that's been missing from previous lifetimes, or something in a previous lifetime that you started or wanted but didn't actually fulfill. Neptune is now putting that thing right at the start of your spiritual path. So if you want to get there, if you want to lean into your soul, you're going to have to go through whatever that experience is. So Neptune moves even a little bit slower than Uranus, with spending 14 years per sign. So that's long. Pluto is the only other one that can be in a sign longer, but it's 9 to 30 years, so it's not always longer than Neptune. Neptune is the ruling planet of Pisces and the 12th house. Neptune, much like Uranus, retrogrades once per year for about 5 to 6 months at a time. So same as Uranus, about half of people have it retrograde in their chart. And I got to think a retrograde Neptune means your spiritual journey will be of even higher priority to you in your focus. That'll just kind of always be a constant, like, how can I lean more towards my soul and doing what my soul came here to do? That's my own interpretation. I haven't read that anywhere necessarily, just based on my own Neptune retrograde in my chart. Neptune return happens at 165 years. So much like Uranus, you're probably only going to experience your Neptune opposition, and that's if you live, 7, 8 decades. So that isn't something everybody sees, but I would imagine is a spiritual turning point. Also, the squares that happen. So you would have a square in your 40s, I think, thereabouts. And that is, again, contributing to that midlife crisis, 40 to 50 years old turning point that we apparently go through. And I think that Neptune square probably plays its part, just like the Uranus opposition. Okay, so in mythology, Neptune is Poseidon, god of the sea. That's why the little symbol on your natal chart looks like a trident, because it is the god of the sea, and that plays into ruling Pisces, which is often the ocean is symbolism used for Pisces. Neptune as well. Because we're kind of in that Pisces realm, a lot of these will sound familiar. Neptune and Pisces sharing these characteristics, but Neptune, its skill is illusion and disillusion, escapism and reality. I say reality because if I asked you all, like, what is reality, we would get as many different answers as each person is in the group. So reality is subjective. The very nature of our experience on this life is subjective, and that's Neptune's realm, where you really can't know anything for sure. Knowledge is very slippery. Feeling, though, is how you would navigate this space, is by connecting to the truth of your emotions and listening for your inner authority, and not necessarily going by reality, because we know reality is one giant illusion that each of us are experiencing individually. So our spirit's evolutionary needs and blockages. So again, I say, like, when we have to claim something, we have to go through a specific experience. Every time we incarnate, our soul wants to move forward. If you study Dolores Cannon's materials at all, especially her book, Between Death and Life, so highly recommend. We come into this earth and into this physical life because we can evolve faster in a physical plane than we can in a non-physical plane. So when we look at our Neptune placement, we're understanding what level of spiritual evolution, what thing did we come to claim so that we can make it to the next rung of our spiritual evolution. It's also consciousness itself. So again, we're getting into this place where everything merges back into one, like water. It's fluid and it's all connected. Neptune and our emotions are how we merge with universal forces. So we can harness the collective consciousness and we can transcend our human limitations through our emotional energy and connecting with that higher power. Neptune and all the specifics, the sign, the house, the aspects, It is your individual souls climb up the mountain. So you imagine this mountain that is spirituality, and at the top is re-merging with source or, universe, whatever. Every single person is going to tackle this mountain a little differently. Like, picture one side of the mountain is covered in snow, a different side of the mountain is a forest covered in trees, and a different side of the mountain is just pure rocks and straight up. And every single person is built to approach the top from a different angle. And that's why we can't compare our spiritual path with somebody else's, or somebody who says, like, you need to meditate, or you have to do yoga, or you have to blah, blah, blah. Like, there is no have to, because just because one person is built to go up this side of the mountain, you might be built to go up a completely different side. So really, we have to turn inward to find this path, because nobody else knows. Only our soul knows who we came here to be. And Neptune can really help us by helping us to understand what our unique path might look like. Any of those, the things on the path are going to spark and provoke spiritual growth. That is the whole point of understanding your Neptune placement, is what your spiritual growth is bound to look like. I like this last concept of uniting ego and soul equals ego strength. There's a lot out there about the bad rap that ego gets and how we need to shed our ego or let go of our ego. And it's really, I don't think it's like that. From what I've put together, our ego is a vehicle that allows our soul to move through this physical world and enact and express whatever it is that we came here to express. The problem with the ego is when we leave it all in the unconscious and we don't consciously choose what our ego is doing. Our ego wants things, it has desires. It wants a promotion at work, it wants a relationship, it wants a house, it wants all of these things. And those things aren't wrong, because they give us the foundation to pursue our spiritual mission here in this world. So these are some examples of how your spiritual path might look different just based on the sign. And these are just a few examples. So like pilgrimage, this would be a Neptune and Sagittarius example. Pilgrimage meaning maybe you fly halfway around the world and you go to Nepal and you find these monks and you go visit them and you see this place. That would be a pilgrimage. Like, you're physically putting yourself through a physical journey to seek spirituality. That is very much within the realm of Sagittarius. Meanwhile, maybe if your Neptune's in Virgo, you volunteer in the community twice a week, every single week, your whole entire life. And someone with Neptune and Sag could look at that and say, you're missing it. You're not seeing the world. You need to get out there. You need to experience different cultures and all of that. And the Virgo person's like, no, I don't. I'm doing what I need to do. I'm being of service in my life and I'm putting myself out there. I'm dedicated to the things I'm passionate about. And then we have Scorpio, where sexuality and death probably, but sexuality is more fun to talk about, is probably your path to spirituality. So your sexual partners bring forth a side of your spirit that otherwise you hadn't met yet. So there are so many sides to get up this mountain, and even just the sign doesn't tell us the whole story. The house is going to contribute. The aspects of what else is it talking to can tell you, again, like how prevalent your spiritual pursuits might be in your world. But yeah. And then Neptune healing. So when you're working in this space of energy, it's a lot more subtle than Uranus. For one, it's moving slower. So when it's transiting one of your houses, that's a 14-year process now, not just a 7-year process. So the change happens much more gradually. And because it's such an internal journey, it is literally like one tiny step at a time. And so again, it's a very subtle change versus Uranus might be your marriage blows up one day, you get fired from your job, like something like that. And all of a sudden your whole life is different in an instant. This is kind of the opposite of that. In order to work with this energy on purpose, you can look up activating and following your intuition, that would be very much tied together with like how to practice your individual spiritual path, would be to find your intuition. If you're not already connected with it, there's lots of resources out there of people talking about how to get in touch with your intuition. But then your intuition will basically guide you. It'll tell you what you need to do. It'll call your heart to buy a bus and remodel it so you can live on the road, and try that for a while. And maybe that is your spiritual experience. Whatever it is, your heart will tell you, your intuition will tell you. Neptune is also given credit for our psychic abilities. I personally subscribe to the belief that all of us have psychic capabilities, and it's just a matter of how much we're listening to them and have the volume turned up on them. But as you tap into your intuition, there's really no way around turning your psychic abilities up louder in your awareness. So just beware that kind of comes with that territory, but it also is, it can be really nice. There's a lot of safety and security that we find the deeper we get into our spiritual path, and we're able to connect with our ancestors and our spirit guides and all of those spiritual resources that are there all the time. But when we're not listening to our intuition, we're not tuned into our spiritual path, we may be missing the support that they're giving us. Neptune transcends what it means to be human, basically. It's the closest that we're going to get to remerging with source while we're still physical. And again, that's going to look different for everyone, depending on what sign and house and all of that. Collective consciousness healing, this kind of goes back to that same idea we talked about with Uranus, where it's not just good news for me. You know, any good news for me is always good news for the collective. And same here, like any soul level healing, any steps forward that you take on your spiritual path is positively impacting collective consciousness healing. So they are very much correlated. So you're driving mass consciousness healing just by doing your own spiritual work. Embrace sensitivity. This is where I feel like I am on the path. Because when you tune into your intuition and when you really open up your emotions and let them flood into your life, they can be overwhelming, and they can cause you to do things in the moment that maybe as you look back on it, you're like, yeah, that was an emotional decision and my emotions got away from me, and that's what it is. And that sensitivity, even though sometimes, especially early on when we're just learning how to work with that energy, maybe we're not that great at it. Maybe it's difficult or uncomfortable or scares the living shit out of us. Whatever it may be, that sensitivity not only brings us into that space where we're having to face those fears, but like I said, on the other side of it is all of that spiritual support and power and true security that we can find by turning into what our emotions and intuition has to say to us. I thought this was interesting. One of the videos I listened to on Neptune said the main obstacle to our spiritual path or to evolving our spirit is attachment that the ego holds. So that would be like my friend who stayed in her bad marriage until he cheated on her and blew it up. She didn't want to admit defeat. She didn't want to get divorced. She was already divorced. She didn't want to be twice divorced. That's an ego thing. The spirit doesn't care how many times you get married or divorced. The ego is worried about the reputation that comes with being twice divorced. So that attachment to, I'm afraid of having that as my descriptor, it caused her multiple more years in that marriage and then a very painful end to it. So the ego keeps us stuck. The ego's attachments keep us stuck. So again, the more you're wanting to lean into your spirit and your soul's path and like fulfilling your soul's mission, it requires us to be honest with ourselves and to let go of anything that our ego is clinging to out of fear of what others are going to think, or, you know, whatever it might be, which again, this is very much where I am as well. Letting go of lots of things is hard. letting go of anything is difficult. So this is again where Neptune is a very gradual process. We lean 1 millimeter a day in the right direction of connecting more authentically with our soul, and give it 14 years and yeah, you're way further down that path. So giving ourselves grace and compassion is kind of key anytime we step into the spiritual world and working with becoming who our soul wanted us to be. You know, you got to think like, if it wasn't going to be great, our soul wouldn't have gone through all the trouble of manifesting this body and this life and all the effort that went into us being here. They must have had something really magical in mind. So it's probably not going to be quote unquote easy, but in the end, oh, so worth it. So that is the end of Neptune. Any questions on our dear friend Neptune? Very good. Pluto, the path to soul transformation. And this is a phoenix rising from the ashes. That is a very classic Pluto symbolism, because that soul transformation that takes place, it's also like a caterpillar that makes its cocoon and then dissolves to goo and then reforms as a butterfly and then comes out of the cocoon and lives a second life as a butterfly. The Pluto placement is a lot like that. Like once the butterfly exists, there is no more caterpillar. It's gone. It doesn't exist anymore. And the Pluto transformation that we're here to make is a lot like that, where we completely leave our old self behind and we become something completely new. So we're going to get into a little bit more about all the hell connotations, but as a result of an intentional descent into hell, you will be happier in the future because you rooted out the underlying causes of unhappiness and dysfunction in your life. So you think about like, if you've ever been to therapy, if you've ever like seen a coach or a mentor of some kind, like there probably were some really uncomfortable conversations as a part of that where you're not doing it for fun. This is not fun work, and it's not exciting and joyful and filled with happiness, but it's necessary. So this is where we get into facing some potentially hard truths about ourselves and the world, but it's ultimately for our highest good. So this is the last of the generational planets. It rules Scorpio in the 8th house. It spends 9 to 30 years per sign. And like the other two, it retrogrades once a year and about 6 months at a time. So that means about half of us have Pluto retrograde in our natal chart. And again, kind of like Neptune, I think that just is kind of translating to like, you are going to make this soul transformation in this life. You've like doubled down, and you've promised to yourself, and that retrograde Pluto is just going to turn up the volume on whatever transformation you intended. Pluto return every 249 years. So that means if you're fortunate to live long enough, you probably will experience a square. 250 divided by 4 is whatever that is. So that's the age that you would go through a Pluto square Pluto. And again, that's just a pressure point on doing that soul level transformation that your soul intended. So Pluto is also called the Lord of the underworld or the God of hell. And you think about like how many people, if they were asked, would you rather go to heaven or hell? How many people say hell? Like none, maybe. So that's kind of the point of Pluto, is it's probably not something you're going to choose to face all by yourself just for fun. Probably something manifests in your life where there's no choice. There's no way around it. It is what it is. Like either the only way through hell is just to keep on going, just go forward, and eventually you reach the end of it. It's our unconscious mind. So it's the things that not only that we've buried in this life, but probably we've brought in from past lives that have been something that we've avoided and truths that we haven't dealt with in our past lives. And now that's represented in our Scorpio placement in this life. Depending on who you listen to amongst evolutionary astrologers, some people say Pluto is the soul. Some people say Pluto is the soul's wound. Even the people who say it's only the soul agree that every soul is wounded. So it's in that territory of basically it is the reason for your incarnation. That caterpillar to butterfly transformation is kind of the center point of what transformation your soul came here to make in this lifetime. And the way I understand it is kind of the rest of the natal chart is playing support and is filling in the details more of what that transformation is bound to look like. It does involve facing harsh truths and realities. You got to think if something was pleasant, you wouldn't have buried it to begin with. So the very fact that you've rejected it in the past probably means there's going to be discomfort in facing whatever that is as it comes back up. But much like the therapy example, as you bring those things back to the surface and you've practiced coping skills and you have more tools than you had back when you originally stuffed it, you bring that back forward and you respond from where you are now. And through that loving of yourself and re-accepting that piece of yourself, there's more wholeness, there's more self-love, there's that healing and regeneration that comes from not only accepting that, but just the effect of no longer holding yourself back, no longer spending the energy to keep that stuffed down into your unconscious mind. It does have connection to the lunar nodes. So the Pluto placement is the transformation your soul came here to make. And then the lunar nodes can tell you more about kind of the south node is the caterpillar end and the north node is the butterfly end, and what exactly is that specific transformation that you're wanting to make. Both Pluto and the north node, south node can help fill in that picture. So when we're healing in the Pluto realm, it's going to be a Phoenix type transformation. So again, you got to wonder how many people would willingly light themselves on fire so that they would burn to ash, so that maybe a Phoenix can rise from those ashes. It takes a lot of faith to step into this place and to trust that doing this work will yield positive outcomes, even though the short term might be very painful or uncomfortable. And I definitely recommend seeking support if you're wanting to more consciously step into this space, either through an astrologer who can talk with you about it, or a therapist, or whatever the right fit for you might be, because you've buried that stuff in the past for a reason. And when it starts coming back up, it's going to bring a lot of shit with it. So that's something to have healthy respect for. Those emotions can be messy and complicated and a lot to sort through. So help can definitely make a big difference. Through doing that work, we gain a deeper discernment of who we are and who we want to be. You think about the caterpillar to the butterfly, we gain better discernment of why we're leaving behind what we're leaving behind and why we're moving towards what we're moving towards. And in understanding that progression can also help with alleviating any of the discomfort that comes up when we're talking about that transformation. A lot of times, what's at the root of the things that we stuffed are our anger, fear, and it doesn't say it on here, but disempowerment. When we feel powerless, when we feel like a victim, when we feel like someone's taking advantage of us, or we're afraid that someone's going to reject us or whatever, those are the kinds of things that we just try to push it away as soon as we possibly can. And those are the things that fester and grow in our unconscious mind the longer we leave them sit there. So a lot of times when you are pulling these things back up from your unconscious, it means facing your worst fears and probably having some of them come true to a certain extent, depending on how willing you're walking into that process. But again, the outcome of doing this work, walking through hell to get to the other side, is you find true strength. You realize that strength has nothing to do with our physical body. It has nothing to do with the physical world. It is purely emotional. Our ability to be emotionally resilient is how I would define true strength. We find our inner source of power You know, so often what we're afraid of is losing things that matter to us. And sometimes we have to lose those things to be shown that this is not it. Either it's not as scary as you thought it was, or it was just as bad as you thought it was, and you survived. Turns out you can survive without that thing that you thought you needed. So all of those things help connect us with our inner power and let us stand in that inner power and live from a place of true self-empowerment, which kind of gives us the opening to self-actualize, to be who we were born to be. Like, you think about going back to Uranus, it wants us to be our individual self. And Pluto is like everything that's standing in the way, every fear we've ever had about losing something or whatever. So reckoning all of that, reconciling all of that, eventually we get to a place of emotional security. And that is the birthplace of true power, true strength. It's a beautiful place to live, where we know for certain that our power comes from us being connected to our soul and nowhere else. And at that point, life in general, the physical world, seems a whole lot less scary. So that's the end of Pluto. Any questions before we cover Chiron? That's the last one, and then we'll spend some time doing some placements. Very good.
I just want to say I appreciate your explanation. It's very empowering versus some people, oh, this is the most feared placement or whatever. I think you mentioned it. Are you evolution astrologer?
I've been studying that more lately, following a few evolutionary astrologers. I am not formally trained at all. I have like a Google degree in astrology. So I appreciate that you like my explanation. That means a lot to me. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. I like the evolutionary perspective, though, that everything serves its purpose. Every single piece of it represents a different side to our story. And our work as a soul in this physical life is to bring them all together and to stand here as who we came to be. We put a lot of effort into manifesting this physical form. So all of them play their part in letting us eventually get to that place where we can be our true self.
Yeah, just how you work with it.
Thank you. Yeah. Tammy probably knows, she's had several readings with me. I just, self-empowerment is like my passion, like for myself, because I've dealt with the holding myself back in that area and have gotten to a place where I can feel how delicious it is to let myself be free. And at this point, my passion is helping other people to let themselves be free, because nobody else can set us free from the cage that we put ourselves in. And I know that from personal experience. And I forget where I heard this. It was an astrology thing. No, it was a human design thing. But basically, it was like you can't let yourself out of prison until you know you're in prison. So regardless of where you are along the path of like being your authentic self out loud in your life full force, there's so many stages along the way of even becoming aware, becoming conscious that this is something that you want. You want to break free of the limitations you're placing on yourself. To even have that desire is a huge step forward in allowing yourself to have that in your life. So yeah, wherever you are on that path, I respect it. Chiron. So I feel like I saved the best for last. Chiron's one of my personal faves. And when we're talking about self-empowerment, it doesn't get any better than this. Chiron, the path of the wounded healer. And I've included a picture in case you want to, help imagining. But Chiron, we talked about, is half asteroid, half comet. And in mythology, he was born as half horse and half man. And at birth, because of his form, he was rejected by both his mother, who was human, and his father, who I guess was a stallion. Neither one of them wanted him. He was weird, he was different, and they didn't want anything to do with him. So his parents, who should have loved him the most, rejected him on sight. And that became his wound that he spent the rest of his life working to heal and trying to become whole again after receiving that wound. And the mythology says that he was never fully able to heal himself, but he got so good at making himself feel better, or like making his medicine to help himself feel better. And then he started sharing that medicine and teaching other people how to help themselves feel better. So yes, we are all wounded. We all have pain. We all have insecurities, all of those things. But we all have the ability to work on ourselves to the point where we have something of value to share with other people that can move the needle in their lives. So again, it's like kind of the Uranus, you're really doing it in service of the collective, even though you're pointing your efforts directly at yourself. It's still for the bigger picture of all of us. So we are all the wounded healer, whether you identify as a healer. I know that's a loaded word. Basically, it's all of us. You know, I canceled a wedding several years ago and then randomly was plopped down in the middle of a yoga class next to a woman who was going through this battle of, she was engaged and living with her fiance and didn't want to marry him. And she's like, I think I have to, like, when in her mind before the conversation, she's like, I think I have to go through with this. And she and I talked, and all I did was tell my story of how I decided not to go through with it. I decided to cancel the wedding right before it happened. And it was the best thing I ever did. I was so grateful that that's what I did. And she ended up doing it too. She didn't marry him. She ended it because she didn't want to. Her heart wasn't there. So that experience that I went through was huge and transformational for me, but me telling her my story and my series of events became huge for her. And if I hadn't had the courage to follow my authenticity and to face hard things and healing that came with that, I wouldn't have had that story to tell her, and her life, you know, would have went in a different direction. But the universe sat us side by side and made us both show up 20 minutes early and facilitated this full conversation. So when we think about our healing and the pain that comes with being physical, it's not for nothing. It really can help serve not only yourself, but lots of other people as well. So I showed you this. Chiron orbits in between Saturn and Uranus. And we didn't go through the social planets, Jupiter and Saturn, but because Chiron is in between the social planets and the outer planets, the generational planets, they say that Chiron, or our wound, our pain, it links our individual experience to the collective experience. So it's kind of a doorway, it's a gateway. Again, when you think about like your own individual experience of your pain and hardships in your life, Chiron is the transition point that says, there's a whole world out there, and maybe I can do something positive with what I've gone through and use it to help other people. So thinking again about those ripple effects that we are all sending out into the universe, whether we mean to or not. So Chiron, the wounded healer, it spends about 4 years per sign, which again, according to all the planets, that's still one of the longer ones. It is transiting Aries right now. So wherever you have Aries in your chart, that is the house that it's working on for you. And even, you know, your unique Chiron placement in your natal chart, that's going to tell you a lot about the wounding and the healing that you're here to do. But even the Chiron transit, I mean, every single house that it moves over, it will heal. And so there are things that bubble to the surface. There's stuff we have to let go of. There's new things that come into our life. That healing process is happening constantly, basically. The Chiron return, this was the midlife crisis starts with the Uranus opposition, the Pluto square in our early 40s. And then towards the end of our 40s is the Chiron return. And much like a Saturn return, this is like an exam. Like your teacher shows up and is like, puts a test in front of you and says, here, take this and let's see how you do. During that Chiron return, you will be confronted with lessons and themes and more pain that is like the pain you came here to heal. And in that avalanche of hardship that is known to come with that Chiron return, you get to see how good you are at making your medicine and how much medicine you have stockpiled and ready to use, and how good you are at making more when you need it. And if you've worked on your healing for a considerable amount of time leading up to this, probably it's going to be a relatively smooth process, even if there are changes and transitions. One, you realize that those are only ever for your highest good, but two, you have your medicine right here. So it hurts and you pour that on there, oh, it feels better. It's like you know how to handle your own emotional pain. And if you do, that's a pretty smooth time. If you don't, it can be a very painful time, again, where anything that's standing in the way of your healing, whether that is basically the only way something can stand in your way is if you're holding on to it and you shouldn't be, those things have to be removed so that you can move forward and heal. So again, loss around that age, those were the blocks. And I hate to say that, you know, not knowing everyone's situation, loss can be very painful and very personal. And I don't mean to minimize it whatsoever, but especially if you're going through your Chiron return and you lose something, chances are it was preventing your healing. So not that that stops the sting of losing whatever it was, but maybe in the long run helps us to wrap our minds around the positivity of those changes that took place during that time. Because that happens in your late 50s, or sorry, late 40s, that means that the Chiron opposition happens in your mid 20s, which I think is really interesting and I hadn't really thought about until right now. But I definitely went through kind of the beginning, like the kickstarting of my soul healing process, which definitely has been a process, right around there in my mid 20s. So that'd be an interesting one to look at if you haven't made it to your Chiron return yet at the end of your 40s, to think back to your mid 20s and see the Chiron opposition and the Chiron return are going to have a lot of similar properties. So Chiron in general, in this territory, we are talking about our woundedness. So I do one-on-one coaching containers with clients where we look at their natal chart piece by piece, and Chiron is always at least the fourth session, if not later, because it is sensitive territory. No matter how much healing you've done around your Chiron, chances are when we start talking about it, the last client I did, I told her, like, your wound begins with your mom, and she just starts bawling, and I'm like, oh shit, what have I gotten myself into? It's tender territory, and it's kind of supposed to be like, you think about the wounded healer, the whole concept is you're able to help other people because you have compassion for their pain because you've lived through your own. So the more pain you've experienced in your life, I would translate that to the more capacity you have for showing compassion to other people in their pain. So again, what kind of good can I do with this hard experience that I've lived through, you know, whether I'm going to do something good with it or not. We're also talking about places where you felt rejected, insecure, or like you've suffered at the hands of other people. Chiron also will tell us a lot about your early childhood manifestations of pain, and whether you consider yourself as having a traumatic childhood or not. Chances are when we start digging around at your Chiron, you experience some sort of trauma, even if it was super subtle. And the Chiron placement sign house aspects can tell you a lot more about the pain that you likely experienced. And then also, you know, any of that pain that you're experiencing, that's the pain that you're here to help other people alleviate. There's wisdom in living through that pain and circling around the same themes and the same concepts and the same jealousy, the same insecurity, the same feeling misunderstood, whatever that is. Eventually, when you've circled around it enough times, you come to some sort of relief. You find a way to relieve your suffering, because as humans, we can't stand suffering for long periods of time. And so that wisdom is what lets us help other people, whether the pain is completely alleviated inside of ourselves or not. We have that wisdom of what we've learned to share. In order to heal your Chiron, it requires us to face our feelings of low self-worth. or lack of self-worth altogether. Basically, like when I started, like mid-20s, I mean, I would say like I hated myself. Like not just didn't like myself, not just didn't love myself, like I actively did not like me. I didn't like my body. I didn't like my attitude. I didn't like my job. My relationship is screwed up, like on and on and on. Life is hard. And I felt like a victim inside of that. Like, why is this happening to me? And the answer was, I didn't believe that I deserved something better. I believed that this was the life that I had, and, you know, it was mine and there was nothing I could do about it. And when I began healing my worthiness and practicing self-love and gratitude and those kinds of things, my life wasn't any different, but me looking at my life was completely different. And I realized, like, you know, my life hadn't been victimizing me, I was victimizing myself. I was stuck in this pattern. And that's where Chiron is kind of like this giant pile of pain that you've brought from past lifetimes, that like little things that you've stacked up over the course of however many lifetimes you've had. And it's pain that hasn't been healed in a past life. You've just been kind of dragging it behind you wherever you go. And your Chiron placement and aspects and all of that tell the story of, this is the pain you brought. This is the pain we're going to work on healing. And like the chick that I sat next to at the yoga class, like, it's amazing how the pain you live, as you work on healing it, you come to cross paths with people who need to hear your story. They need to hear about your pain and what you did to go through it so that they can navigate in their own space. Just like I had people, you know, that I followed before I made my choice and my story was powerful for her. Again, there's such an element of paying it forward that it's not even about our personal healing. It is truly about mass consciousness healing. And that's where the universe brings us together to have those kinds of conversations. So I touched on this. When we're healing Chiron, we are moving towards healing and wholeness, not necessarily we are healed and I no longer have pain. I no longer have insecurities. Like, I don't personally think that's a realistic goal. I think those things are always bound to come up, and how we choose to deal with them or manage them, that's our coping skills. And those can obviously get stronger and stronger and stronger. Chiron healing, it's a doorway between inside and outside. So again, that concept of taking your pain and your experience and using it to help the world around you. These last few are some things that, well, learn to recognize Chiron's familiar ache of inadequacy. As soon as I learned about my Chiron placement and I had studied it and whatever, it wasn't even a week later and something happened that triggered my Chiron wound. And the ache that washed through me was so familiar. Like I had felt it a million times before. And the connection happened where I was like, this is my Chiron. This is my personal brand of feeling not good enough. And that is what this is. And this is the wound that I'm here to work on healing. I'm going to work on it some more now that I'm feeling this wave. And then I'm going to continue sharing my medicine with other people. And recognizing that wave of inadequacy, it doesn't stop it from washing through you, but it does put you in the driver's seat to choose, how do you want to respond to it? Do you want to be a victim to it? Or do you want to know what's going on and know what to do next? You know, my emotions are triggered. When that happens to me personally, I get in my journal and I write down what's going on and I try to sort through all the pieces, and that works for me. Or maybe you talk to a friend, or whatever your process is for handling that emotional wave that moves through you. That's that idea of having your medicine ready so that you can help yourself feel better. When we're looking at our Chiron wound, it's easier to guide others than to absorb the lessons ourselves. So when we look out into the world, it's easy and interesting to look at the guidance that we feel inspired to offer to others. When we look at them and we think it's so easy to see that they're disempowering themselves, or like my friend in her marriage, where it's crazy to me that she stayed as long as she did. But when you're on the inside of it, it doesn't look like that, right? And I totally get that. And so it's interesting that I feel so strongly about telling that story, or like in the moment when it was happening, like I really wanted to give her my advice. I didn't. But I also struggle with enmeshment and codependency, and these are things that I'm working on healing as well. So watching her be disempowered in that relationship was aggravating to me on a soul level, because that's my problem too. So the words that come out of our mouth when we're guiding others, almost always, like, it's beneficial to just turn them right back around and point them at yourself and see if you can do a better job of living up to whatever it is that you think other people should be doing a better job at. I catch myself in this often. Two things to practice: vulnerability. If we're not willing to be vulnerable or hurt, then there's no healing that can happen around our Chiron. It's just that simple. Practice wrapping our not enoughness in self-love. So when we feel that wave wash through us of, I didn't do it right, I'm not good enough, I shouldn't even try, blah, 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 whatever your Chiron talks to you about and says to you, when you recognize that that's what happened, and use that as a moment to wrap yourself and your inadequacy in self-love that says, I'm here. The fact that I'm even physical means my soul is headed somewhere with all this, and I can trust that. And I know this is a painful moment, but I also know emotions are temporary. So the fact that I entered this painful moment just now means that I'll exit it soon enough, and my emotions will resume being positive. So practicing loving yourself through those moments of pain is really the best thing we can do for our Chiron, since maybe or maybe not can we ever actually heal that whole wound, that whole source of pain. So that is the end of my slides. I know I said this goes until 1:30, which is only 8 more minutes, but I am good until 2. So I will plan to stay on and answer questions until 2. So if you guys have any specific placements or anything that we want to talk about, get those ready. We're going to start with Tammy's. Tell me one more time, refresh me, the 2 conjunctions. So it was Uranus and Pluto. And here, take yourself off mute real quick.
Okay, so I've got Uranus and Pluto that are conjunct, directly opposing a lot of things in Pisces. So they're opposing my moon and Saturn and Chiron. So yes, my life has been painful. Everyone feels sorry for me right now. It's appropriate.
Well, and exactly like I said, like the strength of your pain equals the potential for healing power and upliftment for the collective consciousness, you know? And I know, like, I know a little bit about your business and the work that you do to help other people navigate their diagnosis or their healing or whatever. So do you feel like you've kind of crossed that hill of using your pain to help others, like in that Chiron sense of paying it forward?
It's really starting to open up.
Yeah.
It's really starting to get momentum on its own. It seems like there were several years, like the last 2.5 years, I've been trying to get the business going. But now it's kind of taking off more. Yeah, but I'll tell you this, there was a transit that happened just a week ago for me where my natal Chiron was exactly conjunct the transiting Chiron. And I thought I was going to die. I thought I was like, nothing was really happening that was threatening, but I had all of my triggers up and so insecure in life. And I was caving in and I was thinking I'd made no progress and I'm as bad as I was when I was little. And, this is why I joined today, is because I was reminded about something you said months ago. When your Chiron pain becomes not available, start using your own medicine. So I remembered that and I'm like, oh, right, Carly. So thank you so much, because I had to go within. I had to block out the world for a few days, and I had to really meditate and really do yoga and take it easy, love myself, and just put a blanket on me and say, I'm going to be okay. I'm going to be okay. And I tried not to blow up the rest of my life, because that's my tendency, right?
Yep.
When Chiron's activated, we go straight into our panic mode, and you can't approach things logically then. So it was,
And that's where we stand in our own way. Like, and that's a Chiron theme. I know it is, you know, where we're afraid or we're hurting, and then we lash out or we do something that's like just not authentic to who we are, but it's coming from a place of like, when you don't feel good, you can't send any ripple effects out that don't feel good. And so honestly, what you did, I mean, that's my go-to, is like isolation. I just quarantine myself and try not to ripple into anybody else's world until I feel better. And recognizing, like you did, that this is temporary, this is emotional, this is not reality, this is a transit that's happening, that's testing my ability to find my medicine and use it. And sounds like you did. So that's amazing.
well, I did, but I started to lash out at people. And what I had to do once I got it under control is I had to talk to my kids, talk to my boyfriend, really tell them, I am so insecure in this area, and I apologize if it hurts you, but I really had to say, this is what's hurting. I have a special need in this area. I need this more than most people. So I'm sorry if I lash out. And that really helped. I think it was the first time I made it public. Instead of just going within, I said, look, you guys, here's my wound.
Yeah.
Help me if you can, but forgive me where I'm, out of control.
Well, and the compassion, the self-compassion that demonstrates, like that willingness to be vulnerable, to not just pretend that everything's perfect and fine and like, blame other people and lash out and like they're the problem. No, like I did this because I'm having something inside of myself. And to just own that is like an act of self-love that, yeah, I mean, I
was amazed at how many people just poured love onto me in that area. Said, well, you're worried about this, but we didn't think you ever needed us to advocate for you. You're so good at advocating for everybody else. Why would you need, and my kids were like, okay, we'll advocate for you when you lose your voice. Yeah, you bet we will. So it was like, oh, thank God. I always wondered,
Exactly. Like vulnerability. I mean, I think a lot of people stand on the not doing it side for longer than they probably wish they did, just because they're scared. Like when I put this out there, how is everybody going to react? Are they going to reject me? Are they going to say something that makes me hurt even worse than I already do? Because I don't think that's possible. So I'm just going to keep it to myself and not risk that. But to be willing to stand there in pain and say, this is where I am right now. Like sometimes that's all you can do. And that in and of itself, like, is a turning point where you can really feel the love that you have for yourself in that moment, where you're not willing to bottle it up. You're like, nope, this is what it is. So I'm gonna just be with that.
Well, it was hard, but it was totally new for me.
That's
to
amazing.
Literally go to every person in my life that could possibly trigger me right now and say, this is my problem. Can you help me here by being more sensitive? And I realize that I'm asking more than you have to give to the average person in these areas, but I'll do the same for you. That was my big thing. I'll do the same
Totally.
for you.
Yeah.
Just be sensitive to each other's sensitivities,
Yeah.
But thank you.
No, you're so welcome. I'm a huge fan in all of my self-care practices and just emotional practices in recognizing new territory as a milestone moment, and then like literally building a celebration around that new territory, realizing like I've never stood here before. So that is proof that my incremental progress that I'm like making every single day, year after year, that it feels like, am I really changing? Am I really that different than I used to be? Well, old me has never stood in this place. Old me has never been willing to say this and this and this. So that must mean that I've built strength that I didn't have before. And, like in that sense of, do we really ever heal Chiron? If we don't, all we ever have is new territory. So celebrating that like an end all be all in and of itself is totally appropriate, I think. So I celebrate your new
It's brought it
territory.
all together because with Pluto conjunct Uranus directly opposing my Chiron and my moon and Saturn, all three. And then the current transit of Chiron right on top, I was either going to blow up the bad habit or the hiding, I shouldn't say habit, but the hiding of the wounds, or I was going to blow up all my relationships. And I think this might be the first time I didn't damage others.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
Thank you.
That's that medicine, you know, like medicine is such an abstract word, and for everybody's Chiron wound, it's going to look a little different, but self-love, I think, is the main ingredient for most of our medicines. And yeah, I mean, you think like, how can you have a test of how good your medicine is if you don't go through a moment of intense suffering? You know, like if the pain was only this bad and you were like, oh, that's just a little ache, I don't even need medicine. Like, you don't test your medicine then. Like, it has to be bad to be able to see like, oh, wow, like I was able to make myself feel better. And I was in a dark spot like 2 days ago. And now look, I'm like pulled myself out of it. There's empowerment in all of that. So yeah, that's awesome.
Okay, thank you. I've probably taken too much
No,
time.
you're good. That was perfect. Let me look in chat. I think I got a couple things here. Gary says, sent from a Facebook friend. The last time Saturn was in Aquarius was during the Rodney King riots. Pluto was in Capricorn during the American Revolution. Neptune was in Pisces when Rome fell. All three occurring now. If you guys are into those transits, there is a lot on YouTube about the astrology of 2020 and the conjunctions that were happening in the sky at that time. Lots and lots and lots of like exactly like what they just laid out right there, like all of these major transformative energies sitting in the sky right now all at once. Like any one of these transits would be super transformative, and we have all of them. So worldwide pandemic, race riots, like on and on and on and on and on, with the intensity of the transformation being ratcheted up. Yeah, I can feel it. Can you guys feel it? Because I can totally feel it. The power of, I feel like the transformation is almost speeding up. Like I feel in this last year or so that I am being pulled faster and faster to like do my healing, share my authenticity. Like the inspiration to do that is like nearly all consuming. Like the message of this is the time. Do it, please. Do it. Yeah, and at a certain point, you know, you just have to do it. Have to face the fear and do the damn thing. Alex says in the chat, I had a dream with a piece of info, Pluto 0 degree. So I'm here to find out what it could mean. Also, do you think Chiron and Sag look very similar? Oh, okay. So Pluto 0 degrees, I guess to back up a sec and talk about 0 degrees in general, 0 and 29, so the beginning and the end of each sign are called anaretic degrees. And you can Google that and read all about it. Basically, like very significant points in that sign. 0 is on the fresh end of like you're just starting that new territory of that energy, and 29 degrees being like a masterful place of facing advanced lessons and kind of a graduation lifetime in that energy where you've learned a lot and are here to experience mastery of it. So Pluto at 0 degrees, it makes me wonder, Alex, what are your north node and south node? Do you know? Just because we talked about those being related.
I think North Node is 10th house in Cancer and South is 4th in
Capricorn.
what with the yeah.
Interesting nodal placements, first off. And then Pluto, what sign is that in for you?
It's, first house in Libra.
So you have Pluto at 0 degrees Libra in your.
Oh, See, that's not my actual placement. My Pluto is 2452, but the dream just says Pluto 0.
Huh, that's
It's not
awesome.
my actual.
I see. Okay. Pluto 0. Yeah, I see that as like almost an even more intense version of the caterpillar to butterfly transformation, where like you have literally never been a butterfly before. Like if your Pluto's at 0 degrees of a sign, like that sign is brand new territory, and you're here to burn down your old self and rebuild something that is completely brand new territory. That's like just my intuitive understanding. If anybody wants to add to that, that's totally fine.
As you were saying, I'm starting to think, is it saying I'm starting the healing and all the phoenix journey, or what that could mean?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Your nodes are very interesting because the fourth house belongs to Cancer and 10th house belongs to Capricorn. So I always think it's fascinating when somebody's nodes are like the sign and the house are flipped. It's like, wait, what am I supposed to be doing? It's a even more interesting version of trying to understand the nodes and like weave all the pieces together. And then your question about, do you think Chiron and Sag look very similar? Do you mean because they're both centaurs? Is that?
Yeah, it's horse body and the man and with the.
Yes. Yeah, they both do happen to be centaurs. And I personally am not as into like the mythology behind all of it. I'm more like into the energy and the healing side of things. But yeah, I think there's like a whole story about Sagittarius and why it's a centaur. And I definitely get why Chiron is the centaur. Like it was, two different things, like the part asteroid, part comet, whatever nature of its body itself. But yeah, I haven't studied a whole lot of the mythology and like where all of that symbolism comes from.
Yeah, I was just curious. Notice.
Always. Natal charts, it's like the gift that keeps on giving. If you're curious, like there's just a million different things you can soak up and learn.
Nice.
Okay, Dionysus, what is your question?
Hi, first I want to say hello. It's nice to see you presenting this information. It's so well done. So thank you. My question, well, I guess one of my questions would be, first, I'm trying to understand what the most appropriate question would be to ask. So I'll start there. Like what types of questions are appropriate to ask?
I mean, kind of anything. We can look at specific placements, or if you have a question about the planet archetypes, or I'll do my best to answer. Like I said.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess I'm just always curious about, any astrologer's perspective regarding or their interpretation of Uranus conjunct Neptune. But to be more specific, I have a quote unquote mystic rectangle in my chart, which is between this is a lot, so you don't have to internalize all of this, but it's between Jupiter / Chiron, because they're exactly conjunct in my chart, Pluto, and that makes an exact trine to Jupiter and Chiron, and then Uranus / Neptune, because they're conjunct, and then Venus. So I guess maybe just to simplify this question, maybe I'm curious how you would interpret what Uranus conjunct Neptune means in general, and then a mystic rectangle in the chart in general. There we go. That works.
Yeah. So Uranus and Neptune, I mean, if you combine, Neptune is like your spiritual path and Uranus is your own personal rebellion. To me, the instant words that came was spiritual rebellion, that your spiritual path will make other people uncomfortable because it's so new. So I don't know if that lands, but that
Wow.
was kind of what
I just want to give you confirmation. That's so interesting. That was sort of how I was known back when I started my podcast a little while ago. I'm sorry, back when I was 19 years old, like a long while ago. And I made a lot of spiritual figures, that were prominent or on television, really uncomfortable. So, and they thought of me as like the rebellious one. So yeah, that was like the perfect interpretation of that conjunction for me.
well,
That's interesting.
And I have to say, I've never heard of a mystical. Did you say rectangle or triangle?
Oh, mystic rectangle.
Mystic
It's an
rectangle.
aspect configuration.
So that's the first time I've heard that, but I did track what you said of like all the different pieces that are included in that. And with Venus in the mix, like Venus being our values, and then you have this like spiritual rebellion, and then you have this transformation, and then you have this expansive healing and pain, probably. Like all of that looks like spiritual healer to me. And kind of going back to what we said about all these outer planets and how it's kind of the doorway into collective consciousness, the more you work on your own healing, I would imagine like all of those players talking and working together, like that's a powerful force. Like not just drop a stone in the middle of a pond and like little baby ripple effects. It's like drop a freaking planet in the ocean and like the massive tidal waves that come out of that in terms of the potential for change. Like we talked about with Uranus, mutation and improvement then only happens inside the individual. So all of this difference that you're doing in your experience, like, yeah, it probably looks really weird to other people, but in 20, 30 years, it could totally be the norm, So a couple things I would say about that. One, I'm guessing it feels like your life's work on some level to do this. And two, it's probably a pretty lonely path because your transformation is like so single focused, like becoming this spiritual person, like doing your transformation work, doing your healing work. And because you have to, like the Uranus Neptune conjunction, you have to be an individual. Inherently in that, nobody's going to understand you. And that can set up some really like painful things, especially the earlier in life we are. So yeah, I would imagine all or any of that could be true, maybe.
Yeah, all. So that was a great interpretation.
Cool.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Cool. Any other questions? This has been really fun. All right, well, I think we'll end it here then. I've recorded this. It'll be available on the YouTube channel. I'll put the link back in the event. And I also put new content on my YouTube channel every day. So if you haven't already, feel free to subscribe to that and be notified of any of those new videos. On Soul Aligned Living at this point, I am hosting about one event a month, which has been working really well. So look for something around the end of October. Astrology is where I started a little over a year ago, but in the last few months, I've also taken a right turn into human design. So the videos and the events tend to alternate between natal charts and human design. Which I'm knowing that you are familiar with astrology, human design is like built on the natal chart. It's just more pieces added to it and a slightly different way to interpret it. So yeah, I've really loved getting into human design. And if ever you feel like I'm okay on astrology right now, maybe I want some new territory to dive into, human design, holy moly, it's super awesome. And if you're used to reading a natal chart, reading your human design chart will be easy peasy. Tammy,
Yeah, I started looking in. Sorry, Tammy.
Oh no,
sorry.
you're
Carly, how can we send you money for these wonderful lessons you teach?
Aww. Yeah, let me grab the link real quick. My website.
You have a Venmo account or not?
I do. My website is OwningAuthenticity.com, and at the top right, there is a place to show support report. I'm going to grab that link. I really appreciate that, Tammy. Thank you. I do
You're
these
welcome.
for fun, but you know, I'm not going to say no to abundance flowing into my life. So thank you for that.
You've given me so much. So
Oh, well, good. And I'm glad that that popped back into your mind when you were in that Chiron moment.
oh yeah.
That gives
Your
me so
name,
much joy.
your ideas. I'm like, wait, Carly said something about this. Okay, so the show support button is on your website on the homepage.
I did put it in the chat if you have the chat in here on the Zoom.
Okay, thank you.
Alex, what were you saying?
I just said I looked into human design before as well, had the chart and everything, and it does resonate a lot, and it has an astrology component, and it's like spiritual talk too, so it's a little bit like evolutionary also.
Agreed. Yeah, like
Yes.
human design, they call it the science of differentiation. So it's this idea that while humans have a set circuitry based on where the planets were when you were born, it activated a certain circuitry that now your energy is wired that way. And that's the energy you carry throughout your life. And so it's like a picture, just like the natal chart is technically a picture of your unique energy. The human design is like one more way to try to understand the ins and outs and subtleties of like how you are truly unique compared to other human beings.
It is also the combination of the Kabbalah and I Ching, and I really love it too. I love it.
Yeah, it is. It's like they took the natal chart wheel and put the I Ching on top of that, and then in the middle there's all the chakras, and it's like it's got everything. And his story, oh my gosh, if those of you who have looked into human design, if you've never watched Ra Uru Hu tell the story of his 8-day encounter with the voice and how human design came to be a thing back in the late 80s, him telling that story is nothing short of entertaining and completely incredible. And I'm a deeply spiritual person, and it challenged my openness to try to hear the truth of what he was saying. I mean, I believe it because the system itself, I feel like, speaks for itself. But that story, I mean, he went a little crazy there for just a minute and came back with human design. So it was fascinating. Yeah.
Like you, I'm a Gemini sun, and I delved into that story. I thought it was very interesting. Yes.
Yeah, he's such a good storyteller too. Like he speaks so slowly and shows almost no emotion, and yet I am just like on the edge of my seat, like listening to every word he says. But yeah.
Yes. I know
Good.
you're trying to depart, and I would love to let you go, but I'm also curious now that you brought it up. What is your human, like your design type, meaning manifester, generator, reflector? Which are you?
So I'm a manifester, and I have
Me
a
too.
6-3 profile, and the left angle cross of education is my incarnation cross.
How interesting. I know I've felt before that there's some similarities between our vibe and soul, and now there's even more support for that.
Yeah. What profile and incarnation cross are you?
I think 3-5.
I had an ex who was a 3-5. That's
But
the 3 line, we have that in common, that experimenter. Like you have to have all the experiences. Like that's nothing else will do. You have to try them all. And probably most of them will not end well, but you still have to do them all. And you learn through every little bit of it. So yeah, it's just like natal charts. The more I go back to it every single time, there's another little piece that I notice, or it always seems like the piece that I'm ready to hear in that moment is what jumps out at me from the chart, whether I'm looking at my natal chart or my human design chart. And now that I know human design, in my one-on-one coaching containers, I'm using a combination of natal charts and human design charts and numerology. and then combining all of that into those coaching sessions. So that has been really cool also, because some people resonate more with the astrology side, some people with the human design side, but really like the two charts are kind of telling the same story for the most part.
Oh,
Yeah.
of
When
course you are, Miss Gemini.
Yeah, I like them all. I like to learn all the things and then share all the details. So yes, that's been what I've been doing a lot lately, is making videos for my YouTube channel about human design and natal charts and studying. That's my
Yeah.
pastime.
Well, I'll conclude by saying thank you for no wonder you're bent on being authentic. Most manifestors are, and I
The only way.
appreciate you for helping to elicit that sort of authentic way of being in others. And just, yeah, I look forward to like looking at
Thank
your
you.
website and supporting your journey. So thank you.
Thank you. I am so
Thank
glad
you.
you all could be here. Thank you, Tammy. Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Gary, for your chat comments. I love doing these for sure. So I appreciate you all participating and letting me chat at you for a little while. So have a wonderful rest of your day, and I will hopefully see you all in the future. Take good
Thank
care.
you, Carly.
Yeah.
Bye, take care.
Yeah. Bye-bye, guys.